the other night, I stayed up to work, but I was worse throughout the day the next day. So it wasn't just about discipline of like, I'm going to stay up and work. It really was, I need to go to bed to get the rest to be more effective. How do you manage the idea? Because it's really easy to get in the mindset of just work as hard as you can. And while you want to do that, there's also wisdom that has to be applied in. But where do you put that discipline to make sure it's most effective, right? It's the same idea. You can say, I'm just going to work as hard as I can, but you don't bring anyone along the journey, right? Like it'd be easier to sit there and say, well, I'm just going to write out all these teachings. But had you have had someone else do one of those teachings, it would feel like you're not being as disciplined, but be possibly more effective.
Hey guys, welcome to the Troy Gramling podcast. I am glad to see you today. Today's going to be, well, a special show, you might say. But first, I want to welcome everybody and encourage you, if you haven't already, subscribe every week on Thursday at 8 a.m. We drop a brand new episode, and our goal is to partner with you. The only reason that we're doing this is we want to put you in touch with people who can be an encouragement or an inspiration, folks in different walks of life, some of the topics that we've experienced in our own life to really help you in all areas of your life, whether it's your financial life, your business life, your ministry life, your marriage or relationship or dating life. God has created us for greatness. I believe you were created on purpose to do something of significance. And today, well, I got to welcome back to the program somebody who hasn't been around in a while.
I have not.
Carson Luke.
Yes, it is good to be back. Good to be back. Been a little busy, but excited to be back in the studio.
So tell us what you've been busy about.
Well, I lead Next Gen at Potential Church, and we have had quite a bit going on. Lots of different things happening. So excited, moving forward, getting the ball down the field, but just been a little busy with that. So, and new baby.
That's what I want you to talk about.
Yes, the kid.
Really, we didn't care about Next Gen.
Forget about that.
Let's just talk about the grandchild.
Nonsense. Yeah. We had the kid in December. So he is almost 3 months now.
3 months. And his name?
Silas Dean Gramling.
Silas Dean. That's an important name.
Yes, it is.
And Gramling.
Yes, it is.
And how big was he, or is he?
He is getting upwards of 12 pounds. We haven't had him weighed in a couple weeks, but he's getting close to that 12 mark. Might be over. I'm sure he's over 12 pounds now. Probably pushing 13. He's a big old boy now.
He is a big boy. What's been your biggest surprise? You're like almost a 4-month-old father.
I would say I thought that it happened in stages. So like they go through this stage and they go through that stage. And what I have learned is it is different every single day. Every single, like you might think you're out of one stage and then all of a sudden you're right back there. But it's good. He's in his own room. He's been in his own room for weeks now. It's doing good.
Yes. Because the worst decision I think a parent can make is to put him in the bed.
Yeah. But let me tell you, it's tempting. We didn't give into that, but it is tempting when you know, like, oh man, I know they'll stop crying. I know it. It's
it's just you can't ever get them out. Then
correct.
That's the problem. It's
correct.
It's like a dog. I mean, better than a dog. But once the dog starts to sleep with you, it's forever going to sleep with you.
Yeah, 100%.
So then you got a 12-year-old.
Yeah. Now, I'm not going to lie. It's happened a couple times, but not intentionally.
Right.
I was supposed to be watching the kid, and I fell asleep. So it's happened a couple times, but never intentionally, not like through the night or anything like that. But yeah, he's actually done great in his own room, sleeping good for the most part. Was just sick a little bit. So he got over He got over that, but that was a rough couple nights. I hear we're getting close to the teething stage, which I'm not looking forward to. Just like there's nothing you can really do.
No.
They're just hurting and they're going to cry.
Yeah. Well, you can give them one of those frozen pacifiers.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what Jess was talking about. I guess you can freeze milk as well, like their milk. And
also, they can put stuff on their gums. I mean, maybe
whiskey. I heard some parents do a little bit of whiskey on the gums.
No, some kind of numbing stuff, or used. I mean, nowadays some of the stuff we used is now seen to be bad. We used to use powder, talcum powder. Like when you were changing a baby, and nowadays it's like, oh, that's terrible.
Is that like baby powder?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. But when you would change a diaper,
it's terrible.
Yeah, for babies.
Huh.
Now, I'm sure now there's probably baby powder that's not, but talcum powder.
That was a thing.
Talcum powder
yeah.
is now not good. But
for babies.
Yeah, but the talcum powder was called baby powder.
Have you ever used the medicated baby powder? Well, we're going on a tangent here, but it's got a burn on it. It has got quite a burn.
Well, but that's not what you used on the baby.
No. I used it for myself. I was chafing, and I used some of that medicated powder. And whoo,
there's just some things we don't want to talk about.
Okay, yes. You invited me back on the podcast.
I invited you back to talk about the subject we're going to talk about,
which is
in a few moments. Well, first, you've got because we got to talk about the grandkids.
Yes,
that's important. Silas has a cousin. Well, has 3 cousins, but has one cousin that's just like 2 weeks younger.
Correct.
And so for us, Dove, right, we get to watch Dove, who's about, because she was born premature. She was supposed to be like a month or so.
Right.
But since she's premature, but we get to watch like her follow and development, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Because you see Silas, and then like 2-3 weeks later, then you see Dove kind of at that same spot.
Right. Well, and Dove is there with you guys at the house, so you see her every day. Yeah. Whereas Silas, you see like incremental, like all of a sudden he's right. Bailey had said the other day, like right when she thinks like, oh, Dove's like is around the same size as Silas, then she'll see Silas again, and he's grown. He's still a lean guy on the chart, like he's leaner than average, but he's just getting big.
But he is in the 90 percentile head
size. He's got a big old head. That's the truth. He gets that from his father. All that knowledge has to be contained.
It takes a big container to hold a lot of information. But anyways, you can go to our Instagram if you'd love to see some pictures of these incredible children, along with the older grandkids, Lion and Luna. But anyways, I wanted to talk a little bit today. I thought we just have a casual conversation, kind of catch up with the folks. We've had several guests on and talked to them. And you and I haven't really just got together and talk a little bit about life and leadership. Sometimes I think it's just encouraging to hear, what's going on in people's lives. But I wanted to talk about, we talk a lot about potential and success. And so as you think back, in your, let's say, last, decade, since you were 18, or maybe even high school, we go back there to where you're at today. What have been some of the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome in order? Now you're a husband, you're a father, you're a pastor, you lead a team of people, you lead a team of volunteers, So, I mean, that's success in a sense, What have been some of the challenges you feel like you've had to overcome in order to do that?
That's a good question. The one that comes first to my mind is what I call like the cycle of undiscipline. I think that I'm sure there's people out there who could relate to the idea that you have all these things you want to accomplish, right? You're driven, you want to accomplish all these things. You set goals and, okay, here's how I'm going to do it. And you do really good for a short amount of time, and you fall back into old habits. And it can get to a point where you're almost, it becomes near impossible for you to start anything because you just know how it's going to go. You're going to do well for a couple of weeks and then fall back. And it took a long time to work through that. Still working through that in some ways in certain areas of my life. But what it took locking into was the idea of incremental growth rather than thinking of it as, okay, I've got to change my life around in one go. In order, because discipline, you have to have it, right? To be successful on any level, in any area, there's going to be moments where you have to do things you don't want to do. And so it really required me to think of it as incremental. So there are going to be moments where you fall back and, oh man, I had a lazy day. I gave in, I did this, just don't let it be 2 in a row. You know what I mean? Don't fall off the wagon, when you're trying to eat right, which is a recent change I've made, is you're going to have days where you mess up and you eat everything that you desire. Don't let that happen a second day in a row. Don't let that destroy you and just kill you and you just fall off the wagon completely. I find that you'll get to where you want to go as long as you don't let those slip-ups happen for multiple days in a row. And so that has been a huge change in my life. But it was this big obstacle of just feeling like, man, all these things I want to accomplish, I just don't have the discipline to do. I've often said God gifted me with self-awareness. So I knew I was lazy, but unfortunately, I didn't have the discipline to change it. And so locking into that incremental discipline really helped me overcome that challenge in my life.
So what do you think, what areas of discipline have you seen have the biggest positive impact on your life?
That's a good question. I would say the discipline to think of others, has been a hard one. We're all selfish in nature. But I had given into that selfishness for so long of just thinking about me and what I want and what I want to do, that I never really realized how much it was affecting my life in a negative way. That it was once I got married to Jess that I realized it. And then later on, as Silas was getting ready to come, I realized how much of my day was because I wanted it to be that. You know what I mean? Where I went to lunch and what I did in my free time and all of that was based on just me. And so once, Silas was on his way, I was like, okay, well, this is going to have to change because all that stuff is going to have to go out the window if I want to be a good dad. And so that's been one that has been, it's been just incredibly challenging. But however, changing that has had the biggest change in my life. Not that I'm now this selfless guru who's just always thinking of others, but being aware of the fact that, okay, initially you're always going to think about you. Make sure you take the time to think of how is this going to impact others? Who is this going to impact? How can I do something for Jess? How can I do something for the people I work with, for Silas, for you guys, just really trying to take that time. I am someone who likes to encourage. And I found that when you are an encourager, people overlook your selfishness. So therefore, I wasn't aware of it because people didn't really, I've had very few people tell me I'm selfish. And so it really took that inward look at myself to realize, man, a lot of what I do is for me. And so that's been something that's just had a dramatic impact in my life. But it is a discipline. It's not something that just changes overnight. It's sometimes I feel like we try and trick ourselves that, with more knowledge, it'll be easier to be disciplined. And at times that may be true, but the truth is there's just going to be times you just don't want to do it and you just got to do it. It's funny. I'm reading a book right now called Feel Good Productivity by Ali Abdaal, I think is his last name. And he's one of the biggest YouTubers on the idea of productivity. But he talks about how when it comes to, it's not always about being more disciplined, it's about having more joy. And what he says is sometimes we think that it's just willpower that we need to do the things that we hate doing. But is there a way to change your mindset to not hate it? And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. But I think sometimes you're just going to hate it. Sometimes it's not a mindset change. It's an idea of, do you love what you're trying to accomplish more than you hate what it requires? And so that's been, selfishness is one of those. It's like, okay, it's not fun to
Right.
I want to go home and watch Netflix, but I can't do that. And there's not really a mindset change in enjoying that. It's just understanding it has to happen for the growth of my family. And I think when you can apply that to other areas, you really start to see change.
That's not one I think most people would think. Most people think, well, this or that. I had to get up early, or I had to start working out, or I had to. So I think that's an interesting thought, that the discipline to not be selfish, the discipline to think of others. So what does that look like? Do you get up in the morning and think through your day, or do you do it as things come up and you ask yourself, or do you do it at the end of the day? How do you practically discipline yourself to think of others instead of yourself?
So what I try and do is, with my family, starting there, is I think about where I want my family to be, what we want to accomplish, what we want to do. And then I think, well, how much time with them is that going to require? Right? So if I want Silas to be this kind of man, how much time do I need to spend with him in order for him to be, to raise up into that kind of man? And then I try and make sure that time is given, that time is filled. Where does Jess want to get to in life? What does that require of me? Then start with that time. You know what I mean? Rather than trying to fill that in on the back end, it's starting with separating that time out. I think also it is taking a moment when I'm planning out my week. I've had to be intentional about that. I've learned that if things aren't planned out, it will always become selfish. So if I don't sit there and plan out every moment, which is so not me, not my personality, but I literally got a big change, that practical, just a very pragmatic change, was I bought a physical calendar. And so on Mondays, I go and I schedule out my week, hour by hour. Now, I'm not going to hold to every single thing that's there, but what that required me to do is think about, okay, well, I have on here that I'm going to have this time for me time, but there's no family time in there. So that I'm only thinking about myself. Once you see it there written, it really allows you it's easier to think of others in that moment. Then it's just holding to it. You know what I mean? So, okay, I'm going to come home. I'm going to be tired. For example, Thursdays, we have a early morning, 6 a.m. Book study. So I'm out of the house early. I'm up early. Jess does the whole morning time with Silas. I have to know I'm going to come home and be tired, but I need to spend time with him. So if it's written down, then it's just holding to that schedule rather than coming home tired and now trying to make the decision of what am I going to do. And so I think when you can make those decisions early, you still need discipline, but it's just the discipline to hold to what you've already said you're going to do, rather than trying to make the decision of what you're going to do in a time where you're tired, you're selfish, I just want to come home and take a nap, but that's not what's going to be most effective for my family.
Yeah, a lot of people, I'm not a lay out my clothes kind of person like your mother is, but for the gym, I always do, because I know that if I lay them out and I don't go to the gym, then they're going to be there mocking me, making fun of me, like, you didn't go, I'm still here, I'm still here. And I think, that's true in a lot of different disciplines, is making the decision beforehand. I think when it comes to worship, and being a part of a community, being a part of a church, a lot of people don't make the decision of whether they're going to go to church until Sunday morning. And most of those folks are not very consistent. And it's not because they're bad people or evil people. It's just, normally you don't wake up on a Sunday morning at 8:30 and say, let me get up, this is my day off work, but let me get up, let me get a shower, let me, get in the car and drive to church and
get the kids around.
Yeah, it just doesn't happen that way. Whereas if you've predetermined that there's value in that, right? And that being, as a Christ follower, there's a responsibility in that. It helps. So you've made the decision beforehand. Same with giving. There's an aspect of giving. Oh, God nudges my heart now, and so I'm going to give. But there's also the discipline to being prepared to give.
Right.
So the decision's already been made. Before you give me $10 for mowing your grass, I've already decided I'm going to give 2 of that. 20%. The scripture talks about 10, but I'm going to give 20%. I've already decided it,
Yeah.
or 10% or whatever the person has decided. Then I'm not got the $10 and looking at, I've got this bill and I've got and all these things.
Yeah.
And I never get around to it. I never get
Right.
around to going to the gym. I never get around to being consistent in God's community. I never get around to being generous. I never get around to spending time with the family. So I think that's a really important part.
Well, and I think that in this season, with a new baby, you're tired a lot, like physically tired. And what it's shown me is that you really have to be disciplined in these areas, because when you're tired, you'll just resort to who you are. You know what I mean? And I found that at night, when Silas is crying at 2 a.m., I don't have the mental ability in that moment to decide to be selfish or selfless. It's just going to come out. Who am I? Am I someone who thinks of others? Do I care about Jess and Silas enough I'm going to get up and do this? Or am I naturally am I resorting more to what I want in situations? And I think there's often those things in life, right? Moments where it's not going to have a lot of time for you to think. And so you're going to resort to who you are. And so these moments are so important that you build in that discipline, because, right? It's like in the morning when you wake up, it would be really hard for you to all of a sudden become someone who sleeps in. Not that you're not faced with that temptation, but you've built up such a long habit of being up early. And I think that the idea is you want to get to that place where you've built up such a long habit of being disciplined in whatever area you're trying to be disciplined in, because then it becomes difficult to fall to the other side. So the way I see it is, if I can build up a long habit of being selfless, it's not that the temptation of being selfish leaves. It's just I've been so habitual in being selfless that I'm going to fall on that side more often because it's habit. Which,
good.
The book Atomic Habits, I think it's James Clear. It's like, it speaks to that, that idea that once you built it as a habit, it takes so much less brain power to make that decision, because now it's gone to a different part of the brain that's just functioning as a habit.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think, discouragement is another one of those things that can get us out of our disciplines.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like where you're disciplined in how you're eating, but then you don't lose the weight that you wanted to lose.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then you get mad at the discipline, or you get mad at God, or you get mad at you get mad at your spouse or whoever. And I think that is one of those things you have to be careful of too, is that when you get discouraged, is to be aware of that discouragement and the potential that discouragement has to off-ramp you from your success.
Right.
It's easier. The progress you see, when you see progress, it's like, I'm on the right track.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But if all of a sudden, with what you're talking about being less selfish, if all of a sudden Jess were like, you're just so selfish, when you don't mow the grass or something, it's like, I've intentionally been trying to make this progress.
It's funny you mentioned that. We've had a moment within the next gen team at Potential where I call them lock-in moments. I feel like everyone has them throughout life. These moments where it's like, all right, let's reel everything in and let's get hyper-disciplined for a period of time. It can't last forever. It's not sustainable, the amount of discipline you want to implement, but it's to bring everything in. Let's get everything organized. Let's get it together. When you're really trying to make something happen, especially quickly, So I've had that with the next gen team, and we've all been locking in on, hey, we're not going to, that idea of extreme ownership that Jocko Willink talks about, like we're going to own every part of our day, every single part of it. And in that, we saw less people coming to service. And that's discouraging, because it's like, man, we're working so hard. We're all trying to get in shape. We're eating right. We're taking advantage of every moment, trying to take every opportunity. And there's less people coming, which in the church world, you don't want to be just about numbers, but it's a good gauge for, how effective you're being. And I think exactly what you're saying, it's in those moments holding on to, I know this is going to pan out. I know this discipline is going to pull through. I just got to stick with it, you know? And so that's where the benefit of being vocal about where you're trying to be disciplined and having people hold you accountable to that is so important, because in those moments, it's really easy to fall back, you know, and like, okay, I'm going to, you know, and it's never that you're deciding to give up those habits. It just starts with one day, you know, hey, today I'm just going to take it easy. I'm tired. You know, I had that temptation trying to eat better. Like I said, on Thursday, when we woke up early, I'm doing a kind of like a fasting where I try and eat later in the day. But when you wake up at, you know, 3:45 in the morning, you're starving by 8 o'clock. And so, you know, I just started going in my head, well, I mean, I woke up early. It's, you know, if really I should push that time back because I'm up earlier. But just holding to, you know, having people, I knew someone, because I'd been vocal about it, if someone saw me eating at 8 a.m., they're going to say something. So that just helps, you know, push through in those times of discouragement.
Yeah, sometimes discipline, you know, the intentionality of making people aware so they can't hold you, you know. If we're serious, we'll let people know.
Exactly.
If we're not serious, you know, if we're afraid we're going to fail, then we often won't. We actually create a path of failure.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if you got a big vision, but if you're afraid to share it because you're afraid you won't get there, well, you're probably not going to get there.
Yeah.
You know, because you're going to put things into play that are going to lead to failure as opposed to success.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to saying, this is where I'm going, and I'm going to live with the setbacks along the way in order to get there.
You know, I have a question for you, because this is something that I've been thinking about a lot, talking about with my team, is I've always thought of being productive as a key part to success. Mm-hmm. And I've thought of it as purely being disciplined. But I've learned discipline is a huge part of being productive. Just saying, I'm not going to take the 3-hour lunch, I'm going to work. However, there's also a skill to it, because there's a learning in, okay, but how at the same time, so I'll give you an example. The other night, I stayed up to work, but I was worse throughout the day the next day. So it wasn't just about discipline of like, I'm going to stay up and work. It really was, I need to go to bed to get the rest to be more effective. How do you manage the idea? Because it's really easy to get in the mindset of just work as hard as you can. And while you want to do that, there's also wisdom that has to be applied in, but where do you put that discipline to make sure it's most effective, right? It's the same idea. You can say, I'm just going to work as hard as I can, but you don't bring anyone along the journey, right? Like it'd be easier to sit there and say, well, I'm just going to write out all these teachings. But had you have had someone else do one of those teachings, it would feel like you're not being as disciplined, but be possibly more effective. How do you manage that?
Yeah, I think there's a tension in that. And I think, you know, it's like anything, you tend to sway back and forth, and you're hoping you stay in the middle the majority of the time, where I think it's easier, at my experience, I don't know if this is everybody's, my experience is it's easier to do that when you're winning as opposed to when you're losing.
Yeah.
And by losing, I just mean you're not progressing at the speed you want to progress, you know. When it's not going well, the tendency is to, you know, put it all on your shoulders and carry it and think, I have to do it. Because I think that happens to us as leaders. I see it happen even within the congregation. You know, people make a commitment to give, you know, and they'll do that for a couple of months. And then if money, you know, the financial situation gets difficult, the tendency is, well, God's not handling this, I'm going to have to handle this. And so it's like, you know, I've got to do this myself. And I think so to me, I try to be more aware of it during times of challenge. You know, like what is what, you know, because you're basically, you know, talking about what's wise.
Right.
What's the wise thing to do when it comes to your time, your limited resources, your time, your energy, your money, those kind of things. And I do think it's a tension, and we all have tendencies. You know, some people have a tendency maybe to give too many things away during that time. Others have a tendency to try to put everything on their shoulders and, I'll die in this chair,
Right.
kind of a martyr syndrome, which is not, and in ways that's kind of selfish.
Yeah.
It's like, I'll show you,
Right.
I'll die doing this.
Which way do you think you naturally?
Well, I think that I would naturally be more of I'll die in this chair.
I would agree that you would be like that.
Because we're all kind of wired different. So, like, one of the advantages and disadvantages that I have is I get tired, but I don't get,
Can't function.
Can't function. I'm not saying that's never happened, but I'm saying that I can go to bed at midnight or so and get up at 4 and not feel it, or get to a day where I don't have to get up at 4 and still get up at 4. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I mean, I know they tell you have to have a certain amount of sleep. So I think the benefit of that is you can get a lot done. I think the downside to that is you don't have that natural, it's kind of like if your hand is numb and you put it on a hot stove, you don't know if it's burning you.
Right.
But if you can feel and you're like, oh, this is not good, and you pull it away. And I think the same thing is true with energy. There's definitely impact that what we do has on us. If you can't feel it, if you don't know it, you just have to go off wisdom, not.
Right.
And I think then that takes the discipline. All right. So maybe energy wise, but is that the wise thing to do?
Right.
Andy Stanley wrote a book, and that's what he asked over and over. It's like, what's the wise thing to do?
Yeah, which is such a hard question, because there is something, especially in men. I mean, I don't know about women, but especially in men, there's something that almost feels noble about that, right? Like there's something about and that's what motivates me. Like, you know what I mean? Like we were just having a conversation of, you wouldn't say about it yourself, but like how much you have going on in this season, as far as writing one teaching after another, preparing for one meeting after another. That I'm like, that motivates me and inspires me of like, man, I run after it. But there's wisdom in, okay, but if I do all of this, am I being effective in it to the point where someone else could do it better, more effectively, because they have the time to give it? And I think that that's just a struggle and a challenge, because it feels lazy, especially from someone who has had to overcome laziness quite a bit. I am terrified of falling back into that. And so I can be hypercritical of anything that's not like just being at everything. Because it's just like I'm being lazy. You know what I mean? And with having a kid, before it was easier because I had all the time. So there really wasn't a good reason to not be at this or not be at that. Because I have the blessing of working with my wife, so we could be together for all of it. But now wrestling with that challenge of like, do I need to be here for this, or do I need to be with Silas, or do I need to let my team take it, or, and what's being lazy, what's being wise it's a challenge for sure. For sure.
Yeah, and it changes as you age, at different seasons in your life and different ages. The older you get, like maybe the more cynical you can become, because you've given things to people who have then used it against you.
Right.
And it's like not even about, I don't think they can do it. It's like they're going to hurt me.
Right.
If I empower them.
Yeah.
Which is destructive. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like what you said at the beginning. Is what we're pursuing big enough to take the risk, to be disciplined, to go through whatever pain, is your dream big enough?
Right.
And if it's not, then I think, what? It's time to get a bigger dream. There's small steps, but a big dream that's willing to, so that and I kind of close with this. I was listening to, might have been Erwin McManus, but I can't remember, but they were talking about how people are motivated. We're pushed by things and we're pulled by things. In other words, towards success or drive, and we're pushed by things like fear of failure. We didn't have a lot when you were little. In other words, it's things that you're afraid of. And so they push you, right? I don't want to ever be poor, or I don't want to fail, and then there are things that pull us, which are more visionary. A dream of impacting the world. I dream of starting a business or building, those are, and in their discussion, and I'm thinking about it, so I don't know where I kind of come out yet, but they were saying that if somebody's success is predominantly determined by that which pushes them, that it ends up self-destructive. They end up destroying themselves, because you can't ever get away from it.
Yeah.
You're really never making progress. No matter how much money you make, you could lose it all.
Yep.
No matter how many people you reach, there's always somebody else that needs Christ or is hungry, as opposed to being pulled by vision. And I think it's important sometimes to think about that. Not only what am I doing, but why am I doing it? What's the motivating factor behind it, so that we can stay healthy,
right?
Along the way. Well, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
And I am so glad that we were able to have this discussion. I hope that it was an encouragement to you as well. And if there was something that just kind of inspired you or maybe challenged you, or just something that you think, what, my good friend Ronald,
good name,
Ronald McDonald needs to hear that, share it. You never know that sometimes just a click of a button can make a big difference in somebody's lives. I know there's lots of things that I've read, that I've listened to because somebody shared them with me that really changed the trajectory of my life. Something so small can have such a big impact. So if you heard something, hey, don't be shy. Pass it along. Leave us a comment. Let us know what your experience been like, right? What has been your biggest challenge in succeeding, and how have you overcome them? And maybe tell us your experience with discipline. That's one that we all have to work through, for sure. Again, thanks so much for being here. Don't forget, we have a book that came out. It's not been a year yet. It's getting close. If you haven't picked it up, it's called Potential, and you can pick it up at, anywhere really online. It's the journey of the people of God from being enslaved all the way into the promised land, because that's the journey we're all on, right? Going from where we are today to the dream or the destiny that God's put into our heart. And there are challenges and struggles. There are things we learn all along the way. And that's what we talk about in the book. We'll see you at our live stream every Sunday night. And if not, we'll see you right here on the Troy Gramling podcast. God bless, and you have an incredible day. Wait, before you go, if you're enjoying our content, check out this interview or this one here. They're both really good. And don't forget, subscribe. It's really important. We'll see you next time.